Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. We're all interested in finding out the origins of the COVID-19 epidemic to make sure that such a nightmare never happens again to us, and we need the facts. Some people clearly want to politicize the question. Some people think that the finding that it all started with a lab leak would somehow absolve Donald Trump of his lethally reckless response to the pandemic. Of course, his response was dangerously dysfunctional, regardless of how it got started. And his own advisor on COVID-19, Deborah Birx, said that we lost hundreds of thousands of American lives because of the flaws in the response. But even if the virus came from a lab, as indeed it could have, we don't know that yet, that would only deepen Donald Trump's culpability, because he was the one who repeatedly and enthusiastically praised China's early handling of the pandemic and assured us that he was working closely with President Xi on the response to it. So let's just get the facts straight and leave all the political myth-making aside. Now, we've heard claims repeatedly that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins set up the February 1st, 2020 conference call as part of a plan somehow to suppress the lab leak theory. But the committee majority's own June 2023 subpoena to Dr. Anderson says that it was Dr. Farrar who organized the conference call. Well, which is it? Dr. Anderson, it's my understanding that the conference call was indeed set up by Dr. Farrar so top scientists could discuss SARS-CoV-2 genomic features and whether those features could illuminate the origins of the virus. Is that correct, that it was set up by Dr. Farrar?
That is correct.
Okay. Dr. Farrar provided the agenda and the roster of attendees via email. You can see in the top box here in red the agenda, and in the bottom box in red the roster of attendees. In the agenda, Dr. Farrar assigned himself the role of introducing and defining the focus of the call, setting up desired outcomes, and establishing next steps afterward. Neither Dr. Fauci nor Dr. Collins were assigned roles on this agenda. Dr. Gary, it looks like this was in every material respect Dr. Farrar's call. Is that how you remember it?
It is how I remember it.
And what contributions did Dr. Fauci or Dr. Collins make, or did they mostly just listen?
Well, they did mostly just listen. They had very little to offer on the science. I think they were there to gather information.
Okay, now, Dr. Anderson, you said you began yourself with the initial hypothesis that there had been or may have been a lab leak, but you ended up not believing in that theory. Why? How did you change your mind?
I think it's important to understand that we're talking about early hypotheses here on which our thinking over time evolved. And that then led to the conclusions published in a peer-reviewed paper. I would like to point out that this timeline of 3 days, I don't know where that's coming from. The paper was published on the 17th of March, 2020. That's 45 days after this conference call. What's important to understand is that the thinking evolved from initially thinking that this could have been engineered to relatively rapidly discount that idea as being inconsistent with the available evidence. However, the lab leak theory itself, or the idea of a lab leak, can be many different things, and our continued evolution of that then followed that I was quite convinced that maybe it was cultured. And then from there, eventually realized that actually that is also unsupported. And that's what led to the conclusions in proximal origin.
But I have your paper, The Proximal Origin of SARS-CoV-2, in which you write, our analyses clearly show that SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a purposefully manipulated virus. Did Dr. Fauci or Dr. Collins pressure you to come to this conclusion or to suppress the lab leak theory?
They did not. That is fully a conclusion of the authors on the paper. Okay.
Now, one of the things I admire in what you've been saying is that you follow the scientific method. You say in the conclusion of your paper, although the evidence shows that SARS-CoV-2 is not a purposefully manipulated virus, it is currently impossible to prove or disprove the other theories of its origin described here. In other words, we fundamentally don't know, but have there been papers following your original paper that have caused you to revise the view that you have now and to go back to your original hypothesis?
No, but I will say there has been additional data and analyses, which obviously we have taken all of those into consideration. However, these early conclusions remain to this day.
Okay. Well, let's move on to an email that you sent to your co-authors. You wrote, and this has been, I think, much misunderstood. Our main work over the last couple of weeks has been focused on trying to disprove any type of lab theory. Now, you explained in your opening statement that you meant pursuing the scientific process by which you have an hypothesis which stands unless it's disproven. Is that right? Is that what you meant by that?
That is correct. I'm referring to the concept of what's called falsification, as Chairman Wenstrup mentioned too. Yes.
The falsification of a theory.
Yes.
All right. So has there been any attempt, to your knowledge, to censor any papers that would contradict the conclusions that you arrived at here? Or put it differently, you mentioned in your opening testimony that Dr. Fauci had encouraged you to write a paper about the lab theory if that's where the evidence took you. Is that right?
That is correct. I'm not aware of whether papers has been censored specifically focused on the lab leak. I will say again, if you look at the scientific evidence, it all points in one direction, which is the single market in the middle of Wuhan in China as the starting point of this pandemic. There are many papers out there that have described potential lab leaks, which are typically using sort of gods of the gaps type of analogies, where you're trying to say that the data is not perfect, so everything remains still possible, and that's something we agree with. As we specifically say in the paper, you cannot disprove or prove any of the hypotheses of the origin. That was true at the time, and that's still today true.
Well, I just want to commend you for following the scientific method here, for being open to all new evidence and all new data, and not succumbing to a series of political polemics and attacks. Mr. Chairman, thank you very kindly. I yield back to you.